Here's a question nobody is really asking out loud. Why does our money earn almost nothing while it just sits in our bank accounts? Your savings account gives you 0.5%. Meanwhile, there is a way right now, today, to hold a digital dollar and earn 4% on it. No risk, no lending, just your money working for you. And the banks are terrified. This week, the White House sat down with the biggest banks of America and the biggest crypto companies in the world. And they're fighting specifically over whether that 4% is even going to be legal. That fight is what today's video is about. And by the end of it, you'll understand exactly why it matters so much, no matter where you stand on crypto. But let's back up, because in order to understand the fight fully, you need to understand what a stablecoin is, and I promise you, especially for all you Bitcoin OGs, this won't be painful. It'll be a quick summary, and for those of you who are new, it's much simpler than it sounds. That said, what is a stablecoin? A stablecoin is just a digital dollar. That's it. 1 USDT, that's Tether, equals 1 real US dollar, always. 1 USDC, that circle, same thing, $1. Pegged, stable, hence the name. Now, why does anyone need a digital dollar when we already have dollars, right? Good question. Think about it this way. If you want to move money between two crypto assets, say you want to sell Bitcoin and buy Ethereum, you don't have to go back to your bank account. You simply convert it to a stablecoin. It takes seconds. No wire transfers, no 3-day settlement as we experience with our banks. You just move it. So stablecoins are the rails that crypto runs on, and they're not small. According to the World Economic Forum, stablecoin transaction volumes have actually surpassed Visa and MasterCard combined, not in total value sitting around, but in actual transactions moving through the system every day. So when people talk about stablecoin regulation, they're not talking about some niche corner of crypto. They're talking about its very infrastructure, the roads and the plumbing of this new Web3 economy everyone's moving into, whether they like it or not. And last summer, the US government passed the first law ever written specifically about this infrastructure. It's called the Genius Act. And it's the reason we're having this conversation today. And it's the reason the market has been so turbulent as well and just flat. And it's because there's a greater battle happening behind the scenes. So let's dig into the Genius Act and what it actually said and what the central banks are actually so upset about. On July 18th last year, President Trump signed the Genius Act into law, and it passed with real bipartisan support, 68-30 in the Senate and 308-122 in the House. So this isn't a Democratic thing or a Republican-supported bill. Both sides agreed that stable coins need rules. And the rules, of course, make sense. Here's what the law actually does in plain language. 1, it says, if you want to issue a stablecoin in America, if you want to create a digital dollar, you have to back it 1-for-1 to the American dollar. So for every digital dollar you create, you have to hold 1 real dollar or something just as safe, like a US Treasury bill. No funny business, no lending it out, no using it for something else, as the central banks do, mind you. Secondly, it says you have to be a regulated entity. Banks, credit unions, or non-bank companies that go through a specific approval process with the Office of Controller of the Currency. So you can't just make a stablecoin in your garage, as we know has been an issue in crypto with scammy tokens being created literally out of people's garages. 3, these stablecoins have to go through regular audits. They have to disclose monthly reporting of their reserves, with full transparency. That's actually pretty solid and respectable, right? The crypto industry largely supported it. The White House called it a way to cement the dollar's status as the global reserve currency, which we know is one of the larger conversations of national security on the table and behind this act. Because here's the thing, when stablecoin issuers have to hold US treasuries as backing, that actually ends up creating demand for US government debt. So you see how it actually protects the dollar and keeps the dollar relevant in today's economy and into the future. So it's a feature, not a bug. But there was one line in the Genius Act, one detail that nobody paid much attention to at the time because they just didn't care, didn't see it as a real threat, or just were not as well versed in crypto as they are now. And it's that one detail, okay, that everyone overlooked that's about to blow everything up. Here is the loophole nobody talked about. The Genius Act says that stablecoin issuers, okay, the companies that actually create the stablecoin, cannot pay you or me interest or yield just for holding their stablecoin. So Circle can't pay you 4% for holding USDC. That's banned. But, and this is the important part, the law says nothing about other companies not being able to pay you for holding the stablecoin, right? So if Coinbase wants to offer you a 4% reward for holding USDC on their platform, the Genius Act, as written, doesn't stop them. And this is why the banks are furious. That's the gap. That's the loophole. And remember the question I opened today's video with when I asked you why you would keep your money in a bank that pays you only 0.5% when someone else is offering you 4% with no risk? Well, that's the question tearing Washington apart right now. And that's exactly why the banks went to the White House this week. That's the conversation, the discussion going on right now, the battle, and why the banks are actually scared. To understand why they're actually scared, why they're actually intimidated by stablecoins, you need to understand how banks actually make their money, what their business model is. When you put $1,000 in a savings account, that money doesn't just sit there. It doesn't just stay in their vault. The banks lend out most of it to other people, to businesses, to home buyers. That's the engine. That's their business model. It's not a nonprofit. They're turning your money. That's how credit flows through the economy. And the bank pays you a little slice, 0.5% maybe, for the privilege of being able to use your money to make them billions of dollars. And here's a breakdown of how it actually works. For instance, the average savings account pays you about 0.5%. So that's $5 a year they pay you on $1,000. Meanwhile, the bank lends that same money you deposited out as an auto loan at around 6.5%. Mortgages, credit cards at a 20% interest or more. The gap between what they pay you and what they earn is called the net interest margin. And it's massive. And to put a real number on it, JP Morgan Chase, just one bank, okay, reported roughly $94 billion in net interest income for last year, 2025. That's the money they made specifically from the spread between what they charge borrowers and what they pay depositors. $94 billion, let that sink in 1 year, just from one bank. Now imagine, okay, a stablecoin platform offers you 4% for holding a digital dollar, where there's no lending involved. They're not lending out your money, so there's no risk, because we know it's happened before where banks mismanage the money they're lending out, your money that they're lending out, and then they default, and then they need the government to bail them out. And in the meantime, you cannot withdraw your money. So what stablecoin platforms like exchanges like Coinbase are offering you is 4% on money that's at no risk. They're not lending it out. And it's actually backed by treasuries. So you can see how from the bank's perspective, that's not just competition. That's an existential threat to the entire model, to their entire business model. And actually, JP Morgan CFO Jeremy Barnum put it bluntly during an earnings call in January. He said what the crypto industry is building looks like, and I'm paraphrasing here, a parallel banking system. All the features of banking, something that looks like a deposit that pays interest, but without any of the safety rules that banks have spent 100 years developing. Now, mind you, we're going to hone into that language because they should be very, very careful before they put a spotlight on best business practices, transparency, and safety. But first, let us finish hearing what they had to say, what the central banking community had to say. Because the Independent Community Bankers of America released data estimating that if crypto platforms are allowed to pay yield on stablecoins, it could reduce community bank lending by $850 billion, is what they're saying. And that's not JP Morgan talking about losing market share. That's the local bank in your hometown, the one that gives loans to small businesses and farmers. Potentially, according to them, of course, losing the deposits it needs to do that. Standard Chartered put an even bigger number on it. They estimated that unrestricted stablecoin yields could pull as much as $500 billion. out of developed economies and up to 1 trillion from emerging markets by 2028. But let's pause for a second, because are those numbers accurate? Let us fact check, because the other side had something to say about them. But the point is, this isn't banks being irrational. That's what I'm trying to get to first and foremost. They see a real threat, and of course, they're just protecting their turf. But the real question is, does protecting the old system, their system, justify slowing down the new one? Because technically, they could just evolve their banking system and build out their own equivalent of a crypto exchange extension part of their banks, right? They could partake in this new revolution. But what's in the way is education and, frankly, the fact that they're just comfortable with their business model, I would say. But wait, before we move on, let us talk about the bank's track record, okay? Because they brought up this whole safety and fairness regulation conversation. And it's interesting because, as they have been saying, that crypto doesn't have the safety rails we have, that they have oversight, they have compliance. Well, their argument would be a lot stronger if it were true. Because in 2020, a massive leak called the FinCEN, FINCEN files hit the news, where investigative journalists from 88 countries and 400 reporters, okay, it's not coming from one source, spent months going through leaked Treasury Department documents. And what they found was this: over 2 trillion in transactions between 1999 and 2017 had been flagged by banks' own internal compliance teams as potentially suspicious of money laundering, terrorist financing, oligarch money, and drug cartel proceeds. And in most cases, nobody did anything about it. Certainly not Jamie Dimon. And JP Morgan alone had $514 billion in flagged suspicious transactions move through their systems. And HSBC admitted to laundering at least $881 million for the Sinaloa Cartel of Mexico, which is one of the most violent drug trafficking organizations in history. So if the US is truly trying to get to the heart of terrorist activity, it would do them well, now that we're talking about safety and compliance, to dig in deeper to these rules, making sure that central banks don't finance and protect these terrorist groups. And of course, not one single HSBC executive went to prison. And Senator Chuck Grassley called it, and I'm quoting him directly here: the banks had purchased a get out of jail free card, because that's what it comes down to. Unfortunately, I'm just going to call it, it comes down to how much you pay government, basically. And I wish it wasn't so, and I hope that under the Trump administration, this is not the case. But I do have a feeling that it's going to come down to whoever lobbies the government the most. I hope it's not, but it could be. And TD Bank just last year was fined $3 billion for knowingly turning a blind eye to drug trafficking money moving through its accounts. And in 2025, the US Treasury's own FinCEN unit reported $312 billion in suspicious transactions tied to Chinese money laundering networks moving through the banking system between 2020 and 2024 alone. That's not ancient history, that's just last year. So when the banks walk into the White House and say, we need to make sure crypto has the same oversight we have, that's worth leaning into and examining, because the oversight they're pointing to has, by their own admission and by record, failed repeatedly and at massive scale. So the point is, right now, central banks don't have the high moral ground they think they do. So if I was their PR agency, I'd be warning them to steer away from that language, because it's just going to point the spotlight back on them. And then there's one more thing about this fight that nobody's really talking about. And this is the part I find a little humorous personally, because every single day this fight stays in the news. The banks are doing something they absolutely did not intend to do. They are advertising for stablecoins. Think about it. JP Morgan's CFO goes on an earnings call and says crypto is building a parallel banking system. That phrase alone becomes a headline. Millions of people hear it. And the first thing half of them that are switched on, okay, money managers will think of is, wait, what's this parallel banking system? And where do I sign up? Or what's so interesting about it? So the longer the banks fight this publicly, the more they lobby, the more they testify, the more they make noise about how dangerous stablecoin yields are, the more curious people will become about them. They're making the case for stablecoins without meaning to. It's a bit like a restaurant chain running ads that say, don't eat at that new place across the street. Well, because all they did and all they'll end up doing is telling everyone there's a new place across the street and that they're threatened by it. So, okay, now we've heard the central bank side, discrepancies, and misquoted information alike. But now let's hear what the crypto side is saying, because it's not just that they want yield, but it's about why they think it's the right move. And actually, we hear from the Blockchain Association. They fired back at the banking lobby's numbers directly. They pointed to research from Charles River Associates that found no significant connection between stablecoin adoption and deposit outflows at community banks. It turns out that fact by the central banks was misquoted, was erroneous. And the argument is this: people aren't moving money from their bank accounts into stablecoins. They're moving money that was already in crypto. These are two different pools of capital. And then there's the bigger picture argument, the one that gets at something deeper than just stablecoins. A piece in CoinDesk put it really well. The fight over stablecoin yield, they wrote, isn't really about stablecoins. It's about a shift in how people expect money to behave. Think about that for a second, because right now, the system is built so that your money earns almost nothing while it sits there in traditional banks, all while the bank lends it out and captures the return, paying you pennies. And that's just how it's always worked, and nobody's questioned it. And what the crypto industry is proposing right now at its core is, what if that changes? What if holding money meant earning something by default? Not through some complex financial product most people, the average person, doesn't understand, but just transparently on the blockchain. And here's the uncomfortable truth for the banks. That expectation that your money should work for you inherently isn't going away. Even if this specific bill passes with a yield ban, even if Congress sides with the banks on this one, the direction of travel is clear. And as one analyst put it, stablecoins are here to stay. Lobbying won't get the genie back in the bottle. Pandora's box has been opened. You can't stop innovation. So what happened at the White House? The answer is not enough yet. Both sides have a case, okay? Central banks and the crypto side. Both sides have a point, though I'm impartial to the crypto side, obviously, mainly because central banks are corrupt. And that's exactly why this has been so hard to resolve, which is why on Monday, yesterday, the White House got involved. Patrick Witt, and this is where we bring it full circle, guys, so don't click away yet, Trump's crypto advisor, pulled everyone into a room, okay? Crypto firms on one side and banks on the other. White House staff moderating 2 hours of negotiation. And the crypto insiders who were in that room came out feeling like the banks were dragging their feet. The bank representatives didn't present any concrete compromises. They laid out their position, they listened, but they didn't move, which is also classical negotiation. You first want to listen, you don't want to act. Whoever speaks first loses. And Witt actually describes the meeting as constructive, fact-based, we hope, and solutions-oriented, which is a very diplomatic way of saying we didn't get where we needed to go, but we know where we need to go. And the White House gave both sides a deadline, end of February. Come back with actual compromise language on stablecoin yields. And if they can't get it done, the Clarity Act, that's the bigger market structure bill that governs all of crypto, not just stablecoins, could stall as well. And if it stalls past the spring, the odds of it passing this year drop dramatically. But I remain hopeful there will be resolution because everyone wants to make money. And the longer this goes on, the crypto market suffers and the US dollar continues to suffer as it has been. And nobody wants that. So someone's going to have to cut someone a deal behind the scenes. That's what's going to happen. And here is where we are right now. The two most powerful forces in American finance are sitting across from each other. Clock is ticking. And the outcome, whatever it is, will set the rules for how digital money works in this country for years to come. And that's another reason the market is struggling right now. But if you understand Bitcoin fundamentally, you are not worried, and I hope you're not. And if you have questions, let me know. I'd be happy to break down Bitcoin's inherent value and why I believe it's going up to $1 million plus here in the very near future. But back to today's topic. Before we talk about what this means for you and for me, specifically our portfolios, our stablecoin holdings, our strategy, I want to take 30 seconds to zoom out because this fight is not happening in a vacuum. There are two other things happening this week that are putting pressure on the market at the same time. And both of them are things we're going to dig into in the next couple shows. So you'll have to tune in to find out what they are because this video got long enough. So if today's video was useful and helped you understand why there is a real battle, a real war going on between the central banks and the future of crypto, the future of Web3 finance and crypto exchanges, Do me a favor and share today's video with someone who's trying to understand what's going on in crypto right now. Not the price, the stuff underneath, the stuff that moves the price. And if you want to stay on top of how this plays out, the stablecoin fight, the government shutdown, which is the other thing we're going to talk about later this week, and its effect on liquidity, and then also the Iran situation and what it means for risk assets, subscribe to my channel because we're going to go deep on covering it all and how it pertains to the market. That's it for today. I love you guys so much. Keep hodling your Bitcoin and buy more Bitcoin if you can. Catch you guys here tomorrow.